Mama Bear fights with a tiger to save her cubs home. Despite the exhaustion, she won't give up for even a moment. A family of wildlife photographers was watching everything from a distance. They captured something incredible. Before hearing this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Before you hear this exciting story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The sun had barely risen when Sarah woke up with a start. Her heart was racing, as if sensing that this day would be different from all others in her 28 years of life. She got out of bed, ran her hands through her wavy brown hair, and walked to the window of the small apartment she rented in downtown Chicago. The city was already pulsing outside, indifferent to the whirlwind of emotions stirring within her. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. It was the day of the big presentation, the project she had been working on for months as a junior graphic designer at the renowned advertising agency Creative & Co. "It's today," she murmured to herself, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. She knew this was her chance to impress the bosses and finally get the promotion she'd been dreaming of. Quickly, Sarah got ready, carefully choosing a grey pencil skirt and white blouse ensemble that gave her a professional yet youthful look. She grabbed her folder with the printed layouts and hurried out, barely having time for coffee. On the crowded subway, she mentally rehearsed every detail of the presentation. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she almost missed her stop. As she emerged on the surface, she was greeted by a light drizzle, typical of the city. Great, she thought, just what I needed. Arriving at the agency, Sarah went straight to the meeting room. Her boss, Richard, a middle-aged man with an always critical look, was already there, accompanied by a man she had never seen before. "Sarah, good to see you've arrived," Richard said with a forced smile. "This is Greg Mendez, the agency's new creative director. He came especially for your presentation." Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Greg was tall, with piercing green eyes and a smile that lit up the whole room. He extended his hand to greet her, and Sarah felt an electric current run through her entire body as she touched him. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah," Greg said, with a soft voice that made her blush instantly. "Richard has spoken very highly of your work." Sarah stammered a thank you, trying to regain her composure. She couldn't let herself be shaken now, not when she had so much at stake. She took a deep breath and began her presentation, explaining the concept behind the campaign she had created for an important client in the automotive industry. As she spoke, Sarah gained confidence. Her words flowed with passion and conviction, and she could see the gleam of approval in Greg's eyes. Richard, on the other hand, maintained his impassive expression, making occasional notes. When she finished, there was a moment of silence that seemed to last an eternity. Finally, Greg stood up, applauding enthusiastically. "Brilliant, Sarah," he exclaimed. "Your approach is innovative and perfectly aligned with what the client asked for. I'm impressed." The compliment made Sarah blush again, but this time with pride. Richard, however, seemed less enthusiastic. "Well, it's certainly interesting," he said, in a tone that suggested otherwise. "But I think we need to consider some changes before presenting it to the client." Richard's comment fell like a cold bucket of water on Sarah. She was sure her work was exceptional, and Greg's reaction only confirmed it. Why couldn't her direct boss see the same thing? Greg, sensing the discomfort, intervened. "Richard, why don't we discuss this later? I'd like to talk a bit more with Sarah about some details of the project." Richard nodded reluctantly and left the room, leaving Sarah alone with the new creative director. She felt her heart race again, but this time it wasn't just nervousness. "Don't worry about Richard," Greg said, moving closer to her. "He sometimes takes a while to accept new ideas, but I really loved your work, Sarah. You have a unique talent." Greg's eyes met hers, and for a moment Sarah felt as if the world had stopped. There was something in that look, a connection that went beyond professional. "Thank you," she managed to say finally. "It means a lot to hear that from you. How about we grab a coffee?" Greg suggested. "I'd like to hear more about your ideas for future projects." Sarah hesitated for a second. She knew she should get back to work, that she had deadlines to meet, but the prospect of spending more time with Greg was irresistible. "Sure," she replied, smiling. "I'd love to." As they left the meeting room together, Sarah couldn't help but think that this day, which had begun with so much anxiety, was taking a completely unexpected turn. What had started as a simple work presentation seemed to be turning into the beginning of something much bigger. What she didn't know was that this coffee would be just the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever, bringing not only professional opportunities, but also personal challenges that would test her limits and make her question everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and ambition. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air of the small cafe 2 blocks from the agency. Sarah observed Greg over the rim of her cup, trying to decipher the enigma he represented. Her new creative director was a fascinating mix of charisma and mystery, with a smile that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets. "So, Sarah," Greg began, his green eyes fixed on her, "tell me more about yourself. How did you end up at Creative & Co.?" She hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of that gaze. "Well, actually, it was almost by chance," she replied, placing the cup on the table. "I was interning at a smaller agency when a friend told me about an opening here. I thought it was too big an opportunity to pass up." Greg nodded, seeming genuinely interested. "And you were right. Your talent is evident, but tell me, do you feel fulfilled here?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She thought for a moment before answering. I love what I do, but sometimes I feel like I could do more, you know? As if I were stuck in a box that doesn't let me fully expand my ideas." "I understand perfectly," Greg said, leaning forward. "That's why I'm here, Sarah. To bring a new vision, to help talents like yours flourish fully." There was something in his voice, a veiled promise that made Sarah's heart race. She found herself imagining what it would be like to work more closely with him, create projects together, spend hours discussing ideas. "I'd love to have that opportunity," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Greg smiled, a smile that seemed reserved just for her. "And you will. In fact, I have a project in mind that I think would be perfect for you to lead." Sarah's eyes widened. "Lead? But I'm just a junior designer." "A junior designer with the potential of an art director," Greg completed. "Trust me, Sarah, I see something special in you." The rest of the conversation flowed like a dream. Greg talked about the new project, an ambitious campaign for a cosmetics brand that wanted to reinvent its image. It was exactly the kind of challenge Sarah had always wanted to tackle. When they finally left the cafe, the Chicago sky was already tinged with the orange hues of sunset. Sarah felt light, as if she were floating. It wasn't just the prospect of the new project that made her feel this way, but also the connection she felt with Greg. "Thanks for the coffee and the conversation," she said when they arrived back at the agency's door. "I can't wait to start working on this project." Greg smiled again, that smile that made something inside her melt. "The pleasure was mine, Sarah. I'm sure we'll do great things together." He leaned in, and for a moment Sarah thought he was going to kiss her. Her heart raced, a mixture of anticipation and fear. But Greg only gave a soft kiss on her cheek, a gesture that could be interpreted as purely professional, but which left a trail of fire on her skin. "See you tomorrow," he whispered, before turning and entering the building. Sarah stood still for a few seconds, trying to process everything that had happened. When she finally managed to move, she decided to walk a bit before going home, needing to clear her mind. As she walked through the bustling downtown streets, her head was spinning. On one side, the excitement about the new project and the prospect of working closer to Greg. On the other, a twinge of guilt. After all, she had a boyfriend, Peter, whom she had been with for almost 3 years. Peter was stable, reliable, the kind of man her mother always said she should look for. They had a comfortable life together, without great emotions, it's true, but also without major conflicts. It was safe, it was predictable. Greg, on the other hand, represented the unknown, the exciting, the dangerous. He made her feel things she hadn't felt in a long time, awakened a passion she didn't even know still existed within her. Arriving home, Sarah found Peter on the couch, watching a football game. He barely raised his eyes when she entered. "Hi, honey. How was your day?" he asked distractedly. Sarah hesitated. How could she sum up everything that had happened? How could she explain that in a single day, her whole world had turned upside down? "It was interesting," she said finally. "We have a new creative director at the agency." "Oh yeah?" Peter responded, still not taking his eyes off the TV. "Cool." Sarah felt a wave of frustration. It was always like this, wasn't it? She wanting to share her experiences, her dreams, and Peter. Peter was always there, but never really present. She went to the bedroom, closed the door, and threw herself on the bed. As she stared at the ceiling, 1,000 thoughts raced through her head. The new project, the opportunity to grow in her career, Greg and his enigmatic smile, Peter and his comfortable but suffocating stability. Sarah knew she was on the brink of something big, something that could change her entire life. But would it be for better or for worse? And more importantly, was she prepared for the consequences of her choices? With these questions echoing in her mind, she closed her eyes, trying to find some rest. Tomorrow would be a new day, the first of many that would test her limits, her loyalty, and above all, her heart. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Sarah. The new cosmetics brand project, dubbed Renaissance, consumed all her time and energy. She spent hours at the agency, often staying late into the night, immersed in a world of colors, shapes, and innovative concepts. Greg was always nearby, guiding, challenging, and increasingly fascinating Sarah. His presence was like fuel that drove her to go beyond her creative limits. Brainstorming meetings stretched for hours, with ideas flowing freely between them, creating a synergy that Sarah had never experienced before. On one of those nights when the clock was nearing midnight and the office was practically empty, Sarah and Greg were bent over a table full of sketches and mood boards. "Look at this," Greg said, pointing to one of Sarah's drawings. "This fusion of organic elements with geometric lines is exactly what we were looking for. It's bold, it's fresh, it's revolutionary." Sarah felt her face heat up with the compliment. "You really think so? I was afraid I'd gone too far." Greg moved closer, his eyes shining with an intensity that made Sarah's heart leap. "Sarah, you need to understand something. In our field, there's no such thing as too far. It's precisely when we think we've gone too far that we create something truly innovative." He placed his hand on hers, a gentle touch that sent shivers throughout Sarah's body. "You have a rare gift. Don't let the fear of taking risks stifle your creativity." At that moment, with the city asleep outside and the office plunged into an almost palpable silence, Sarah felt as if she were on the edge of a precipice. Part of her wanted to jump, to dive headfirst into that intense feeling that Greg awakened. Another part, however, reminded her of Peter waiting at home, confident and oblivious to the turmoil going on inside her. I need to go," Sarah said, abruptly pulling away. "It's late, and we have that meeting with the client tomorrow." Greg nodded, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Of course, get some rest. Tomorrow will be a big day." Sarah left hurriedly, her heart beating so hard she feared it could be heard by the security guards in the lobby. When she got home, she found Peter sleeping on the couch, the TV still on. She observed him for a moment, feeling a mixture of affection and a growing sense of distance. Careful not to wake him, Sarah went to the bedroom. Lying in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about Greg, the project, how her professional life was about to take a significant leap, but at what cost to her personal life. The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the agency, determined to focus only on work. The meeting with the client was scheduled for 10 a.m., and she knew it would be a crucial moment. When she entered the meeting room, Sarah was surprised by a familiar face. There was Chloe Vance, CEO of the cosmetics brand and one of the most influential women in the country. Sarah knew her from business magazines and TV shows, but seeing her in person was a completely different experience. Chloe exuded an aura of power and sophistication that immediately filled the room. Her perceptive eyes evaluated Sarah from head to toe, as if measuring her competence with just a look. "So you're the young designer that Greg praised so much," Chloe said, her voice soft but authoritative. "I hope you're up to the challenge, dear. Our brand needs more than just a pretty redesign. We need a revolution." Sarah felt the weight of those words, but instead of intimidating her, they energized her. This was the moment she had worked so hard for. "Ms. Vance," Sarah began, her voice firm despite her nervousness, "I believe we have exactly what you're looking for." With a nod from Greg, Sarah started the presentation. As she explained the concept behind the Renaissance campaign, showing the images and layouts she had created, she could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. Chloe's eyes, initially skeptical, began to sparkle with interest. "What we're proposing is not just an image change," Sarah explained, her confidence growing with each word. "It's a complete redefinition of what beauty and personal care mean in the 21st century. We're talking about empowerment, authenticity, celebrating diversity in all its forms." When Sarah finished, there was a moment of silence. Chloe rose slowly, her eyes fixed on the panels Sarah had prepared. "Impressive," she said finally. "Truly impressive. Greg, you were right about her. This campaign, it's exactly what we needed." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of animated discussions and enthusiastic planning. When it finally ended, Chloe approached Sarah. "Congratulations, dear," she said, shaking Sarah's hand firmly. "You've just become a very important person for the future of our brand. I expect great things from you." As soon as Chloe left, Greg hugged Sarah impulsively, lifting her off the ground in a moment of pure euphoria. "You were amazing," he exclaimed. "I knew you could do it." In that instant of celebration, with Greg's arms around her and the sweet taste of success, Sarah felt as if she were on top of the world. But a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her that the higher you climb, the more painful the fall can be. What Sarah didn't know was that that meeting wasn't just the beginning of a new phase in her career. It was the first step on a journey that would test not only her creativity and ambition, but also her most fundamental values and the ties that bound her to the people in her life. As the Renaissance project came to life, Sarah was about to discover that the true Renaissance would be her own, a process as exciting as it was frightening, that would lead her to question everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. The following weeks passed like a whirlwind for Sarah. The Renaissance project had become the center of her universe, consuming every moment of her time and every drop of her creative energy. The agency was buzzing with excitement over what promised to be a revolutionary campaign, and Sarah was at the epicenter of it all. Her routine had completely transformed. She woke up before dawn, often finding Peter still asleep, and returned home late at night, exhausted but electrified by the adrenaline of work. The endless hours at the agency, the heated discussions with the team, the brainstorming sessions that stretched into the early hours, all of this had become her new normal. And then there was Greg. His constant presence, his unwavering support, and his inspiring guidance had become indispensable to Sarah. They formed a formidable duo, their creative minds complementing each other in a way that seemed almost magical. But as time passed, Sarah began to realize that the line between professional admiration and personal attraction was becoming dangerously thin. On a particularly intense night, when they were finalizing the last details for a crucial presentation, Sarah found herself alone with Greg in the office. The clock showed almost 1 in the morning, and the silence of the sleeping city seemed to amplify every beat of her heart. "I think we finally got it," Greg said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smile. "This campaign is going to change the game, Sarah, and a big part of that is thanks to you." Sarah blushed at the compliment, feeling that familiar wave of heat that always came over her when Greg looked at her that way. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "Your guidance, your support. It's been amazing working with you, Greg." There was a moment of loaded silence, during which their gazes met and seemed to lock onto each other. Greg leaned slightly forward, his hand gently brushing Sarah's on the table. "Sarah, he began, his voice low and intense. At that instant, Sarah's phone vibrated loudly, breaking the spell of the moment. It was a message from Peter. "I'm worried. Are you okay? What time are you coming home?" Reality hit Sarah like a bucket of cold water. Peter, her boyfriend, the man who had supported her for years, who loved her unconditionally. And here she was, on the verge of what exactly? "I need to go," Sarah said abruptly, standing up and starting to gather her things. "It's late and, well, Peter is waiting for me." Greg nodded, a flash of disappointment, frustration, passing quickly through his eyes before being replaced by his usual professional expression. Of course. Rest well. Tomorrow will be a big day." Sarah practically ran out of the office, her heart beating erratically. In the taxi on the way home, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. What was happening to her? How had she allowed things to get to this point? Arriving home, she found Peter asleep on the couch, the TV tuned to a 24-hour news channel. She observed him for a moment, feeling a mixture of affection and guilt. Peter was good, stable, reliable. He deserved more than a girlfriend who was barely present, both physically and emotionally. "Sarah?" "You're home," Peter mumbled sleepily, opening his eyes. "I was worried. You've been working so much lately. Sarah sat down next to him, forcing a smile. "I'm sorry, honey. This project has been very demanding, but it's almost over. I promise." Peter hugged her, and Sarah allowed herself to sink into that familiar and comforting embrace. But a part of her couldn't help but compare the feeling of comfort and security she felt with Peter to the electricity and excitement she experienced around Greg. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the agency, determined to keep things strictly professional with Greg. But her plans were thrown out the window when she was met with unexpected news. "Sarah, glad you're here," Greg greeted her, an excited gleam in his eyes. "I have amazing news. Chloe Vance was so impressed with our work that she wants us to present the campaign at the company's annual convention in New York next week, and she insisted that both of us go personally." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. New York? With Greg? For a week? The prospect was simultaneously exciting and terrifying. But it's such short notice," Sarah stammered. "I don't know if I can—" "Sarah, this is the opportunity of a lifetime," Greg interrupted, holding her hands. "Think about what this could mean for your career. You deserve this. We deserve this." As she looked into Greg's eyes, feeling the warmth of his hands in hers, Sarah knew she was at a crossroads. Her decision wouldn't just be about a business trip, but about the direction her life would take from then on. With her heart racing and her mind in turmoil, Sarah found herself about to make a decision that would change everything. New York awaited, with its promises of professional success and perhaps something more. But at what cost? The plane landed smoothly at JFK Airport, and Sarah felt her heart race. New York, the city that never sleeps, of romance, and now the stage for her biggest professional opportunity yet. Beside her, Greg smiled, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and something else, something Sarah couldn't, or perhaps didn't want to, name. The decision to come hadn't been easy. The conversation with Peter still echoed in her mind. "A week in New York? With your boss?" Peter had questioned, his voice a mixture of concern and distrust. "It's an incredible opportunity, Peter," Sarah had explained, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "It could completely change my career." In the end, Peter had given in, but not before making Sarah promise to call every day. The guilt she felt upon seeing the resignation in his eyes still weighed on her chest. Now, as the taxi snaked through the streets of New York towards the hotel, Sarah tried to focus on the task ahead. The convention would start in 2 days, giving them time to finalize the last details of the presentation and, perhaps, see a bit of the city. "I'm thinking," Greg began, his voice pulling Sarah from her thoughts, "that we should take a walk tonight. You know, to relax a bit before the intense work we have ahead." Sarah hesitated. Part of her knew she should refuse, keep things strictly professional, but another part, a part that grew every day, longed for more time with Greg. "Sure," she replied, smiling shyly. "That would be great." A few hours later, after settling into their adjacent rooms at the luxurious hotel, Sarah and Greg were walking along the banks of the East River. The Manhattan skyline glittered in the distance, a beacon of light against the night sky of New York. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Greg commented, stopping to admire the view. "You know, Sarah, sometimes I think we're like this city, brilliant, full of possibilities, but also with our shadows, our secrets." He turned to her, his eyes intense in the light of the street lamps. "Have you ever wondered if you're living the life you really want?" The question hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She looked away, fixing her gaze on the dark waters of the river. I don't know, I think so. I mean, I have a good job, a boyfriend who loves me. But is that what you want?" Greg insisted, taking a step towards her. "Or is it what you think you should want?" Sarah felt her breathing quicken. Greg's proximity, the smell of his cologne, the intensity of his gaze, it all made her dizzy. "Greg, Before she could finish the sentence, Greg leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, almost hesitant at first, but quickly transformed into something more intense, more urgent. For a moment, Sarah lost herself in the sensation, her body responding with a passion she didn't know she possessed. Then, like lightning cutting through the sky, the image of Peter appeared in her mind. Sarah pulled away abruptly, breathless and confused. "No, we can't," she said, her voice trembling. "This is wrong. I have Peter, and you're my boss." Greg stepped back, his eyes a mixture of desire and frustration. "Sarah, what we feel for each other goes beyond any label. You can't deny there's something special between us. I need to go, Sarah stammered, turning and starting to walk quickly back to the hotel. Sarah, wait, Greg called, but she didn't look back. Back in her room, Sarah threw herself on the bed, her body trembling and her mind in turmoil. What had she done? How had she allowed things to get to this point? Her phone vibrated. A message from Peter. Hi, honey. How was your day? I miss you. Sarah looked at the message, feeling a wave of guilt engulf her. She loved Peter, didn't she? He was safe, reliable, her safe harbor. But Greg made her feel alive, challenged, passionate. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself torn between guilt and desire. During the day, she and Greg worked side by side, preparing for the big presentation. The tension between them was palpable, charged with furtive glances and accidental touches. At night, alone in her room, Sarah oscillated between calling Peter, seeking comfort in his familiar voice, and staying awake, reliving the kiss by the East River. Finally, the day of the presentation arrived. Sarah woke up early, determined to focus only on work. But when she entered the conference room and saw Greg, impeccable in his suit, her whole body reacted. "Ready?" he asked, his confident smile masking the tension in his eyes. "Ready," Sarah replied, swallowing hard. As they prepared to take the stage, Sarah knew it wasn't just her career at stake. The choices she would make in the coming days would shape not only her professional future, but her entire personal life. With her heart racing and her mind in conflict, Sarah stepped forward, ready to face not only the audience of executives, but also the demons of her own heart. The conference hall of the luxury hotel in New York was packed. Executives from around the world, specialized journalists and influencers from the beauty industry, anxiously awaited what promised to be a revolutionary presentation. Backstage, Sarah took deep breaths, trying to calm her nerves. "You've got this," Greg whispered, placing his hand on her shoulder. The touch, even brief, sent shivers throughout Sarah's body. She nodded, unable to trust her own voice at that moment. When they finally took the stage, all the personal tension between them seemed to dissipate. Sarah and Greg moved in perfect sync, presenting the Renaissance campaign with a passion and eloquence that captivated the audience from the very first instant. The powerful images, impactful slogans, and innovative concept behind the campaign drew gasps and enthusiastic applause. Sarah could feel the energy in the room, the growing approval, the buzz of excitement spreading among those present. When they finished, there was a moment of silence before the room erupted in applause. Chloe Vance, seated in the front row, was the first to stand up, a radiant smile on her face. "Brilliant," she exclaimed, climbing onto the stage to hug Sarah and Greg. "You not only met our expectations, you exceeded them. This campaign will redefine our brand globally." The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews, champagne, and congratulations. Sarah found herself at the center of attention, praised by some of the biggest names in the industry. It was everything she had always dreamed of, and yet, at night, during the celebration party, Sarah stepped away a bit, seeking a moment of quiet on a balcony overlooking the illuminated city. Her phone vibrated. Another message from Peter. "Congratulations, my love. I saw the news online. I'm so proud of you. Can't wait to celebrate when you get back." The message should have made her smile, but instead, Sarah felt a pang of guilt and confusion. She loved Peter, didn't she? Then why couldn't she feel the joy she should be feeling? "There you are." Greg's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He joined her on the balcony, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. "I thought you might want to celebrate in a quieter spot." Sarah accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his in the process. "Thank you. It's just that it's a lot to process, you know?" Greg nodded, his eyes fixed on her. "You were incredible today, Sarah. Not just today, actually. Throughout this entire project, you are extraordinary." The compliment made her blush, and Sarah turned to the view of the city, trying to hide her reaction. "I couldn't have done it without you, Greg. Your guidance, your support." "No," Greg interrupted her gently. "Don't diminish your achievements. This is the result of your talent, your vision. I was just lucky enough to be there to witness it." He moved closer, and Sarah could feel the heat of his body, the smell of his cologne mixed with the aroma of champagne. "Sarah, I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just professional admiration. Sarah closed her eyes, her heart beating erratically. "Greg, please." "We can't." "Can't what?" he insisted, his voice low and intense. "Can't be honest about what we feel? Can't seek the happiness we deserve?" She turned to face him, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "And Peter? He loves me, And do you love him?" Greg asked, his eyes searching hers. "Do you really love him, Sarah? Or are you with him because it's safe, because it's what's expected of you?" The words hit Sarah like a punch. She opened her mouth to protest, to defend her relationship with Peter, but found she couldn't find the words. Greg took another step towards her, eliminating the space between them. "Sarah, I know it's complicated. I know there's a lot at stake. But I also know that what we have is rare, it's special. We can't simply ignore it." At that moment, with the city of lights shining in the background and the distant sound of the party reaching them, Sarah found herself facing the most difficult decision of her life. On one side, the safety and familiarity of her life with Peter. On the other, the passion and possibilities that Greg represented. She looked into Greg's eyes, feeling simultaneously terrified and electrified. I don't know what to do," she whispered. Greg raised his hand, gently caressing Sarah's face. "Maybe," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "the answer lies in what you feel, not in what you think." And with that, he leaned in and kissed her again. This time, Sarah didn't pull away. She surrendered to the kiss, letting all the repressed emotions, all the denied desires come to the surface. When they finally separated, breathless and with racing hearts, Sarah knew there was no turning back. Her life had changed irrevocably, and the consequences of her choices were about to unfold in ways she could barely imagine. With her head spinning and her heart divided, Sarah found herself on the threshold of a new phase of her life, a phase full of promises and dangers, of passion and guilt. And as the New York night enveloped them, she knew that, regardless of what she chose, nothing would be the same again. The flight back to Chicago was a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah. Each mile that brought her closer to home seemed to increase the weight of guilt in her chest. Beside her, Greg slept peacefully, oblivious to the internal turmoil she was facing. The last nights in New York had been a whirlwind of passion and discoveries. Sarah had completely surrendered to her feelings for Greg, living each moment with an intensity she had never experienced before. But now, with reality rapidly approaching, she felt torn between desire and duty. When the plane finally landed, Sarah felt her heart tighten. Peter would be waiting for her at the arrivals gate, eager to celebrate her success, ignorant of the storm that was approaching. "Everything will be okay," Greg whispered, discreetly squeezing her hand as they collected their luggage. "Remember what we talked about. Be honest with him, and with yourself." Sarah nodded, unable to find words. When they exited into the arrivals area, she saw Peter immediately. He was smiling, holding a bouquet of flowers, his eyes shining with pride and love. The sight was like a stab in Sarah's heart. "My love," Peter exclaimed, hugging her tightly, "I missed you so much. You were incredible in the interviews I saw online. I'm so proud of you." Sarah returned the hug mechanically, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Over Peter's shoulder, she saw Greg discreetly walking away, casting her one last meaningful look before disappearing into the crowd. The days that followed were an exercise in dissimulation for Sarah. During the day, she immersed herself in work, capitalizing on the success of the Renaissance campaign. At night, she tried to act normally with Peter, but each gesture of affection from him made her feel even more guilty. Her nights were populated by restless dreams, where she saw herself divided between two lives, one of passion and excitement with Greg, another of stability and comfort with Peter. She woke up sweating, feeling lost and confused. A week after her return, Sarah couldn't bear the weight of the secret anymore. She decided it was time to be honest, not just with Peter, but with herself. "Peter, we need to talk," she said one night after dinner. The tone of her voice must have alarmed Peter because he immediately turned off the TV and turned to her, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong, Sarah? You've been strange since you got back from New York. Is something wrong?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling tears forming in her eyes. "Peter, I did something terrible. I got involved with someone else." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah watched Peter's face go through a series of emotions: shock, pain, anger, disbelief. How? Who? He finally managed to stammer. Greg, Sarah answered, her voice almost a whisper. My creative director. Peter stood up abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. I knew it. I felt there was something strange about this trip. How could you, Sarah? After everything we've been through together. Peter's words were like knives, each one of them piercing Sarah's heart. She tried to explain, to talk about her conflicting feelings, about how everything happened, but each word seemed to only make the situation worse. I love you, Peter, she said between sobs. But I don't know what I feel anymore. I'm confused. Peter stopped, looking at her with a mixture of pain and disbelief. You don't know what you feel. After 3 years together, after everything we've built, you don't know. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with years of memories and now broken promises. Finally, Peter spoke, his voice low and defeated. I think you need some time to think, Sarah, to decide what you really want, and I need time to process all of this. With those words, he grabbed his keys and left the apartment, leaving Sarah alone with her guilt and confusion. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself in an emotional limbo. Peter had temporarily moved to a friend's house, asking for space to think. At work, she and Greg maintained a facade of professionalism, but the tension between them was palpable. One night, unable to bear the silence of her empty apartment, Sarah decided to take a walk. Her steps unconsciously led her to a nearby park where she and Peter used to stroll on weekends. Sitting on a bench, observing the families and couples passing by, Sarah wondered how her life had become so complicated in such a short time. She had everything she always wanted, a stable relationship, a promising career, and now everything seemed to be falling apart. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Greg. I miss you, can we talk? Sarah looked at the message, feeling her heart race. She knew she was at a crossroads. Her decision would affect not only her love life, but also her career, and, more importantly, her own identity. Who was she really? The safe and stable woman who had built a life with Peter, or the passionate and ambitious one who felt alive in Greg's arms? As the sun set on the horizon, painting the Chicago sky with shades of orange and pink, Sarah realized that the answer wouldn't come easily. She would have to dive deep into herself, face her deepest fears and desires to find the path she truly wanted to follow. With trembling hands, she began to type a response, knowing that her next words could change the course of her life forever. Sarah looked at the phone in her hands, the cursor blinking impatiently, awaiting her response to Greg. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she finally typed, We need to talk in person. Tomorrow, at the cafe near the agency, at 7 a.m. Having sent the message, Sarah felt a wave of determination surge within her. It was time to take the reins of her life, to make choices based not on what others expected of her, but on what she truly wanted for herself. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the cafe before the agreed time. While waiting, she mentally went over everything she wanted to say. When Greg entered, her heart raced, but she maintained her composure. Sarah, Greg began, sitting across from her. Please, she interrupted him gently. Let me speak first. Greg nodded, his eyes fixed on her. Greg, what happened between us in New York? It was intense, passionate, and yes, it changed my life, Sarah began, her voice firm. But it also made me realize many things about myself, about what I really want and need. She paused, taking a sip of her coffee before continuing. I realized that I can't build my happiness on someone else's unhappiness. What we did, it deeply hurt Peter, someone who has always been by my side, who supported me unconditionally. Greg tried to speak, but Sarah raised her hand, asking for silence. But more than that, I realized that I'm at a point in my life where I need to find myself, to rediscover myself. I can't depend on a relationship, whether with you or with Peter, to define or complete me. Sarah saw understanding slowly form in Greg's eyes. So what you're saying is, he asked, his voice almost a whisper. I'm saying that I need time for myself to grow as a person and as a professional. I can't be in a relationship right now, not with you, not with Peter. Greg leaned back in his chair, absorbing Sarah's words. After a moment he spoke. I understand. And I admire your courage, Sarah. It couldn't have been an easy decision. It wasn't, she confirmed. feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. But it's the right decision. For all of us. They talked for a while longer, agreeing on how to keep things professional at work. When they said goodbye, there was a mixture of sadness and mutual respect between them. Leaving the cafe, Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks. Her next stop was Peter's apartment. The conversation with Peter was difficult, charged with emotions. There were tears, recriminations, but also moments of understanding and finally acceptance. "I love you, Peter," Sarah said, holding his hands. "And part of me will always love you. But right now, I need to love myself first. I need to discover who I am outside of a relationship." Peter, with tears in his eyes, nodded slowly. "I understand, Sarah. It hurts, but I understand. And as hard as it is to admit, I think I need this time too, to heal, to grow." They hugged, a long and emotional embrace, marking the end of one chapter in their lives and the beginning of another. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah immersed herself in a process of self-discovery. She dedicated herself even more to work, taking on challenging projects and expanding her skills. She started practicing yoga and meditation, seeking emotional and spiritual balance. At work, her relationship with Greg gradually transformed into a respectful and productive professional partnership. They formed a formidable creative team, channeling the energy that was once romantic into innovative projects that further elevated the agency's profile. Sarah also picked up old hobbies and discovered new interests. She enrolled in a photography course, something she had always wanted to do but never found the time for. Gradually, she began to see the world through new lenses, not just metaphorically. A year after her decision at the cafe, Sarah was in her apartment, now redecorated to reflect her new personality, when she received an email that would once again change the course of her life. It was an invitation to lead a social marketing project in San Francisco, combining her advertising skills with her newly discovered love for photography. Looking out the window at the Chicago skyline, Sarah smiled. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace with herself and excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Peter. "Saw the news about your new project in San Francisco. Congratulations, Sarah. You deserve all the success in the world." Sarah replied with a sincere thank you, happy that they had managed to maintain a friendship after everything that had happened. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah reflected on her journey. The Renaissance campaign had been a turning point in her career, but her true renaissance was personal. She had rediscovered herself, reborn as a stronger, more authentic and happier version of herself. With a smile on her lips, Sarah fell asleep, eager for the next chapter of her life, a chapter she would write on her own terms, following her own heart.